At the start of every season, there's some teams who come out and surprise us. For example, I'm not sure many of us thought that David Moyes' West Ham would be challenging for European places, nor yet that Erik ten Hag's Manchester United would be doing quite so bad as they are. But in this video, what I'm going to suggest is that the most surprising team of all the surprising teams in the world right now are Girona in Spain. Now, Girona are currently sitting second in La Liga. They're just behind Real Madrid. They're just ahead of Barcelona, which in itself is quite surprising. But what is even more surprising is that Girona's success has come after a summer where they lost a lot of players. So on the board in front of me here, what I've got is the starting 11 that Girona had against Osasuna in the final game of last season. Now, if we fast forward to the first game of this season, there were a number of players who weren't in that starting 11. So I'll just highlight these players here. We can see 5 players that were starting at the end of last season weren't in the starting 11. Now, a couple of these players are still at the club, so Bernardo and Martin were simply not starting, but there are a number of players here who actually ended up leaving the club. So we have Tati Castellanos and Rodrigo Riquelme. They were both on loan. They've headed off now. Castellanos is now at Lazio. Riquelme is back at Atletico Madrid. Oriol Romeu, as you may remember, ended up at Barcelona. And another player who didn't start in this game, but who was a stalwart throughout the season in the centre-back line, was Santi Bueno, and he was sold off to Wolves as well. So we've got 4 players here who are fundamental to Girona's success last season who simply aren't in this starting 11. And if we go back to that starting 11 from the end of last season, Arnaud Martinez has spent most of this season on the bench. And so what we're left with then is only 5 players who are regularly playing this season for Girona. But it's not just that Girona have lost a lot of players, it's that they've lost a lot of key players as well. So on the board in front of me, I've got a graphic which shows the top 11 players per minutes played from last season versus this season. Now, the players whose names are in yellow are the players who appear on both lists. So if we look at the top of last season's list, we can see that none of those top 4 players are in yellow. That either means that they've gone or they're not playing as much as they were last season. So Bueno, Romeu, Castellanos, they've all gone, as is Rodrigo Riquelme. So those are the 4 key players who left. But we've also got Arnaud Martinez here, who's not playing as much this time around. Which means that when we come to this season's list, there's a whole bunch of players now who are having to take up the mantle of playing more minutes. And to give you a sense of how important those key players were, I've got a quote here from the Girona manager Michel talking about how Oriol Romeu is a really important influencer on the pitch. So Michel is talking about how difficult it is to influence games as a manager on the sideline, and he talks about how important it is then to take advantage of any breaks to gather 4 or 5 key players to convey messages to them. And those are the players who are going to modify the behaviour of the players on the team. And he goes on to highlight Romeu in particular because he says, with a gesture, I can tell him that the rival's pressure has changed, that it is not what we expected. So what he's doing is he's communicating with Romeu on the field. He can let him know very quickly when things need to change, and then Romeu can communicate that to the rest of the team. But despite the fact that they've lost a lot of key players, Girona's performances this season have actually seen a bit of an uptick compared to last season. So we've got the basic underlying numbers here. So expected goals, slightly up. Expected goals against, slightly down, what you want. But the important thing to notice here is that the expected goal difference has not only improved, but it's gone from a minus figure to a positive figure. And that is what good coaching does. Now, it is worth having a caveat here, which is that Girona have only played 2 of the teams who are challenging for Champions League spots this season. That's Real Madrid and Real Sociedad, and they actually dropped points to both teams. And also the only other team that they've played in the top half of the table is Las Palmas, which may mean that their underlying numbers are slightly inflated, but there's still a big jump from this to that. It's nearly half an expected goal difference, all of which suggests that Girona are on the up. But there's another surprising thing here, and that is that Girona are a relatively recently promoted side. Their manager, Michel, brought them up in the 21-22 season, and it's surprising then that they are now challenging at the top of La Liga. And that fact is even more surprising when we take a look at Michel's CV. So as you can see, he's a professional footballer, spends a lot of time at Rayo Vallecano over 2 stints, picks up nearly 400 appearances for them. And when he finishes his playing career, he then moves nicely into the coaching career. So he has a place at Rayo Vallecano working in their youth system. He then becomes the full head coach of the senior squad in 2017 with Rayo Vallecano still in the Segunda Division. But in that first season, he takes them up into La Liga, and the following season, he actually gets sacked midway through the season, and Rayo end up getting relegated. From Rayo Vallecano, he goes to Huesca, who are also in the Segunda Division, and guess what? Exactly the same thing happens. He gets them up into La Liga, he's sacked mid-season, and Huesca get relegated. So when he arrives at Girona the next season in the Segunda Division, there's a lot of people expecting him to get them promoted, but maybe not so many people expecting him to keep them up. So the big question is, why was Michel struggling to get his promoted sides to stay in the top division? Well, I've got a quote from the man himself that offers some kind of solution to why this might be the case. He says, "My idea as a coach has always been the same, which is to be a protagonist." And what he means by that is he wants to impact games by having possession of the ball. But as he goes on to say, this doesn't always work because sometimes in the top tier, this costs you more. So in the Segunda Division, he can be a protagonist, but as soon as his teams are getting promoted to the next level, it becomes a little bit more difficult. Now, this is a quote from last season when Girona are actually mid-table in La Liga. So clearly something has changed there, and Michel goes on to explain what that change might be. He says, "What I've been doing is adapting situations so our players don't find themselves in difficult situations." And that's the important word there, adapting. So what's happening with Michel at Girona this time around is that he's finding those adaptations to help his team stay in the league. So to achieve their surprising success this season, Girona have had to overcome two aspects. The first one is that loss of a lot of key players, and the second one is doing that tactical adaptation that allows them to challenge at the top of La Liga. So let's look at both of those in turn. So how do you overcome the problem of losing a lot of key players? Well, obviously you go and buy more. So what I've got here is a list of Girona's most notable signings in this window. And the first thing to notice is just how little money they've spent. This is around 22 million euros of expenditure for a bunch of players who, as we'll go on to see, have been really important for them. Now, top of this list is Artem Dovbyk, who was one of the top scorers in the Premier Liga in Ukraine last season. He got 24 goals in 30 games, which is obviously an incredible rate of return for a number 9. He still only cost around 8 million euros. Now that low fee is in part because he had moved to Midtjylland in Denmark and not really had a successful time there, but he's actually arrived at Girona and he's just become an incredible number 9 for them. Now there are a number of players here who were loan signings last season who they then converted to full contracts. So we've got Yangel Herrera brought in from Manchester City, Ivan Martin from Villarreal and Paulo Gazzaniga from Fulham, and these have all become very fundamental players for them as well. So again, you can see nice solid signings that they know are going to translate this season for not a huge amount of money. We've also got Daley Blind here, brought in from Bayern Munich on a free transfer, and we all know Daley Blind, he's played at the highest level of the game, and he has that flexibility to play either as a centre-back or as a full-back. He's got really good passing range as well, and he's become absolutely fundamental to everything Girona do this season. And then a couple of loanees coming in as well. Eric Garcia from Barcelona is basically Daley Blind light. He can do that on the other side. He can play as an outside centre-back or as a full-back, depending on what you need. And then the most exciting name on this list in Savio, who's been brought in from Troyes on loan and has become one of the most electric players in La Liga this season. Why is Savio so exciting? Well, because he is an exceptional two-way dribbler who can cause problems to teams at any level of the game. This season, he's put up 4.1 take-ons per 90 minutes, which puts him third in La Liga for that metric. Now, I've called him a two-way dribbler. What do I mean by that? Well, if we look at this plot, which shows his progressive carries this season, we can see it's very clear that he has the ability to go down the line, hit the byline, cross the ball back with his stronger left foot, but he also likes to come inside as well, and he's actually proven to be a really dangerous player in front of goal as well. And when you have a player like Savio, it's really important to set up your team to get the most out of him. How do you get the most out of a really good dribbler? Well, you get him isolated 1v1 against his fullback. If he's a two-way dribbler, he'll be able to go round them either way. And the important thing then is to give him space so that he can either get down the line or, as we said, come inside as well. And this is what a lot of Girona's in-possession play is based around. Now, one of the ways that Girona like to do this is by overloading on the opposite side, because that is obviously going to drag the opposition towards you and create space around your winger. So against a back four, Girona like to use their centre forwards to occupy the two opposition centre backs. And then what they end up doing is just dragging everyone to this side. Sigankov is playing nominally as a wide player, but he loves to come in between the line of the fullback and the centre-back here, and that opens up space then for Jan Kuto to get forward as well. Now, the rest of the midfield are going to push forward, but actually, surprisingly, Ivan Martin is going to push across into this kind of area, which is opposite to the side that you might see him in a defensive transition. Now, this has created a lot of space around Savio, but there's still things that his teammates can do in order to help him exploit that space. And this is where the role of Daley Blind, for example, comes to the fore, because what you can do with Daley Blind is actually open up channels for Savio to move in, because there's likely to be a centre midfielder in this sort of area stopping Savio from coming inside. And so Daley Blind can do various things in order to try and help him out. One of those things is to push into this lane here, pull the centre midfielder with him, and that's going to open out space in the inside area. So Savio does have the ball, he can dribble into this sort of area now with the centre midfielder moved out the way, and with Savio coming inside, often what you'll see then is Daley Blind move out to adopt that wide area that Savio was previously in. That means you can still have the same sort of structure with the option of playing the ball out wide as well to Blind who can then play the ball back across into the middle, and now we have Savio almost playing as a second striker. I've got a really nice example of this happening in the game against Mallorca. So Girona are attacking this goal here. Here's Daley Blind, and as you can see, he's right up against that central midfielder, pulling him a little bit deeper. That opens access out to Savio, who's somewhere over here. So you can already see how they're using the structure to generate a huge amount of space around Savio. Here's the fullback, and then all of this space to play with. Here's Savio with the ball now. He's fronted up against his fullback, but what we can see here is that central midfielder is going to come across and try and double up on him. So in order to pull him away, what we've got now is Daley Blind. He's going to run across into this seam between the fullback and the centre-back in order to try and destabilise this player here. Now this has actually opened up quite a lot of space in the opposition's defensive structure. The first one to notice is just the gap between the two centre-backs. If you're a centre-forward, you look at that gap and you think, yes, this is going to cause problems. But the other space that's opened out is this space here on the edge of the penalty area, and Savio is going to see that space and aim for it, not least because, as you can see, the direction of the defending players is actually pulling them this way, so he can come back inside and actually become much more dangerous around this spot. Here you can see Savio in that space that was opened out, and you can see he's pulled a lot of the defenders around him, and actually what's happened is that we now have Daley Blind isolated against the fullback over here. Now what is going to happen is that Savio is going to play the ball to Sigankov, he's going to play the ball back across to Daley Blind, and they're going to be in this nice situation again. So once again, they've managed to get a wide player isolated up against the fullback. Daley Blind is going to play the ball into the box, the keeper is going to try and palm it away, and the ball is going to fall in this space here, and lo and behold, we've got Savio here, who's moved inside, who can now play as a dangerous attacking player in front of goal. And actually this doesn't end up in a goal, but it's a really good example of how Girona are using Savio to really great attacking effect. But if we go back and replicate that situation on the tactics board, we can see this is actually a really aggressive way of playing. Daley Blind is nominally an outside centre-back in a back three, but he's actually playing as a functional fullback here, trying to get the ball in. And everyone is overloaded on this side. And what that does is it opens out a huge amount of space that oppositions can attack. And that brings us to that second obstacle that Girona have had to overcome this season in order to be able to challenge at the top of La Liga, and that is tactical adaptability. Because it's all well and good playing this way against Mallorca, a team that Girona would expect to beat, because it's generating huge amounts of attacking upside for Girona. But if you play like this against better teams, then very quickly you're going to find your defensive structure compromised. And I have another quote from Michel again, this time talking about that adaptability. Again, this is from last season, and he says, we changed small details last season in order to stay in La Liga. He talks about how he started playing with a back three and started to try and dominate the penalty box more, so being a little bit more defensive around the goal itself. Now, the result of that is that you're going to make certain trade-offs. So he says, we were less strong in the defensive transition because we're missing a player inside. Now, obviously, when you start playing with a back three, you have to get that extra player from somewhere else, so you take them from further up the field. And what that means is that you're slightly more open, particularly in defensive transition. But Michel said that doesn't matter because the upside was that we became stronger defending the penalty spot. And here's the key phrase, without losing offensive power. And that is the key to be able to compete at the highest level in the modern game. Because the most elite coaches are those coaches who make it feel as though they're attacking with the most players, but also defending with the most players as well. Now, obviously, Michel was thinking about those ideas last season, but this season he's taken Girona to a whole new level. And this shows up really nicely if we return to that interplay between Daley Blind and Savio that we saw against Mallorca, because against Mallorca, you can afford to push one of your defensive players into this sort of support role to cause these problems to give space to Savio. But against better teams, you might not want to do that. And that is exactly what we saw when Girona played against Real Madrid. So the question is, how do you have a support player around Savio, but also not compromise that defensive solidity by pushing Daley Blind up? And the solution that Michel found for that against Real Madrid was to bring a different player onto the pitch. So we don't have Ivan Martin on, we actually have Miguel Gutierrez. Now Gutierrez is nominally a left back. He spent a lot of last season playing as a left back and coming inside, and that's exactly what he does in this game. So he starts out in defensive moments as the left back here, but he can come inside, help out in the midfield, but also he can do that support play that we saw Daley Blind doing with Savio, so pushing up right up against the opposition back line. If they have a back four, what this does is this causes problems between the fullback and the centre-back. Does the centre-back step up? Does the fullback move off? Does the centre midfielder come across to help out? It creates those issues that result in space that Savio can attack. But it also allows Daley Blind to play this more defensive, conservative role as well. And this shows up really nicely in the data. So here we've got a pass map from that Mallorca game where you can see the interplay between Savio and Daley Blind. You can see everyone else is overloaded on the other side, creating a huge amount of space behind them. But when we jump forwards to look at the Real Madrid game, we now have Miguel Gutierrez over here just offering a little bit more support. There's much less overloading on that side Obviously, Girona are a little bit more defensively minded here as well, but it just gives you a lot more of a solid base to defend those moments as well. And so what this achieves is precisely what we were talking about before, the ability to feel as though you've still got your attacking upside, you're still creating the same sorts of problems for the opposition in an attacking sense, but you're also able to fall back into those defensive moments as well without being compromised. Because what's going to happen is if the ball is won back by Real Madrid, then this line can drop in, Gutierrez can fall back into his left back slot, Jan Couto can fall back into the right back slot here. And so what Girona end up with here is almost a de facto back five, but actually there is flexibility to do other things as well, because one of the things we saw from the Real Madrid game is that these two midfielders can drop, but also David Lopez can step forward to offer a little bit more solidity in the middle, and the rest of the players can squeeze in. You've got your back four here, you now have a really solid midfield three in the centre area, and then you have your three players forward as well. And that's where we see an overlap between the two obstacles that Girona have had to overcome for their success this season, because some of the players that they brought in the transfer window have actually allowed them to be more tactically flexible this season. Most importantly, by adding Daley Blind and Eric Garcia to their squad, Girona now have a couple of players who can either play as centre-backs or full-backs on either side, and that just gives them a huge amount of tactical flexibility. So we've already seen a system where Gutierrez can drop in as a left-back in those defensive moments. Once Girona have the ball, their build-up can be quite flexible now, so Gutierrez can come inside, we can move Daley Blind across and Lopez across and have Gazzaniga moving into that first line as well. But then once Girona have settled possession, what can happen is that Gazzaniga will drop back into goal. This becomes a back three. We've now got Blind playing as an outside centre-back, and Gutierrez can do the support play that we saw him do with Savio as well. And we also see in that other system where Gutierrez isn't on the field, Daley Blind is now effectively playing as a fullback. Once again, in those early phases of build-up, we can have the goalkeeper coming out making a back four, but in defensive transitions, what will now happen is that Garcia will drop inside as the centre-back, and we'll either see Jan Couto dropping in here, or you could even play Arno Martinez as well. Now, Martinez has been playing as one of those inverting fullbacks as well, so you could have a situation now where you're inverting from the other side, and you end up with the same sort of situation in those deep build-up phases. And this tactical flexibility has the impact that Girona can feel as though they've got an extra player in the deep phases when they're building up, but also an extra player when they're attacking, because they have the ability to move these players into more advanced positions when the ball is moving down the field. So for me, Girona are the most surprising team in the world right now, given they're only in their second season in La Liga this time around. Obviously, there's still a long way to go and their schedule is going to get more difficult, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're still challenging for European spaces by the time the end of the season comes around.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.